righty, I think we're 6 o'clock has sprung. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the February 4th special assembly meeting. Please join me for a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Assembly of the City and Borough of Sitka would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional first people of Sitka. With gratitude, we proceed on Tlingit Ani. Sarah, roll call, please.
Mr. Pike?
Here.
Ms. Carlson?
Here.
Mr. Yestad?
Here.
Mr. Christensen?
Here.
Mr. Mosier?
Here.
Mr. Celine?
Yes.
And Mayor Eisenbeis is absent.
Thank you. Are there any correspondence or agenda changes this evening? Seeing none, we will move on to persons to be heard. There are persons to be heard for public participation on any item off the agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes per individual. Are there any public comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to new business. We are at new business, item A, preliminary discussion direction for the FY 2026 municipal budget with focus on the enterprise funds. John, would you like to give us an introduction?
Yes, thank you. So another budget meeting in the compressed process this year. Tonight is one that gets a lot of attention on the utility and harbor rates, going through the enterprise funds, and Melissa has a comprehensive presentation for all of us, and it'll show kind of how we landed on some of the rate recommendations, and we'll be looking for some guidance from the Assembly tonight on what those rates look like, so then we can adjust the revenue side of the model as we put the full budget together. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to start out by just going over the process a bit to remind you of how we arrive at the rates that we're proposing tonight and some of the assumptions behind what is going into the proposed rates. So we, for all of our ratepayer supported funds, we come together as a team and we discuss any overall changes from the prior year and any new challenges that were maybe unforeseen the prior year. We come up with all of the assumptions, make sure everyone is okay with those assumptions, and then these all go into our fiscal models that outline our operating and capital expenditures going forward between 10 years and upwards of 30 years, depending on the capital plan that we have available for the fund. And then the final step is to get Assembly guidance on the rates. It's very ideal to get the guidance beforehand. It takes quite a bit of work to put the revenue projections together. So if we put them together with the right numbers, that's a lot less work for everybody. So we're still dealing with slightly higher inflation. It's a lot lower, but we are still seeing higher inflation in construction, particularly around certain types of infrastructure. Harbor infrastructure is very expensive, and then as is electric. And then staffing, ongoing staffing, it's harder to recruit. We're certainly doing much better in terms of recruitment, but staff are costing more. Overall, we are, where possible, not proposing new infrastructure. So our long-term plan is based on fixing what we have with like assets. Of course, there's often, if we haven't touched something for 30 years, there's a lot of improvements that are now required by law, so that can be more expensive. And then we're also looking to see where we can just get a substantial amount of life out of an asset rather than jumping to a full replacement. So I think the harbor system is a good example where we're looking to extend the life of those assets. I think a recent one was the Fisherman's Work Float, where instead of doing a complete replacement of that asset at over $5 million, we're doing a much more scaled down project, but that should buy us 10 years where we can save up and have more working capital available to fund that project. We certainly have potential for grant funding. Again, the grant funding is very expensive for the city to manage, and it's very complicated. And sometimes the projects that are more attractive to funders are not those that are our highest priority. So when we do get that funding, that kind of shifts the priority of our project. So that's something we just have to weigh when we're looking at grant funding. And then with the new administration, we don't quite know what's going to be funded and how it's going to be funded. And then we have, in a lot of areas, things that are driving our rates are unfunded mandates. So we have the water filtration plant that we recently completed for the water fund. We have the upcoming effluent disinfection that is being required for our sewer treatment plant. In electric, we have FERC requirements, and then we recently put in place the solid waste compactor. And then I think the other consideration is how we fund our capital projects. So we certainly have debt in pretty much all of our funds, all of our enterprise funds. And I think one thing that's helpful, and we're certainly seeing this particularly in the electric fund, is our debt and our debt payments are becoming a lot easier to manage as inflation grows and revenue increases, because those rates are set. But it's also difficult. We have to make decisions about when we do a project. Do we wait to save up and fund that project, or is it a project that needs to be done sooner and we have to take on more debt? And then there's always the kind of bigger picture question of who is paying for infrastructure that in some cases might last 50 years. And there's arguments that would say that it wouldn't be fair to pay that solely out of today's ratepayers' funds, and debt lets us spread that load to the users who will be using it in the future. So to get to these numbers, we all come together. So that is John, many of our department heads and division leaders who really know the operations of our different funds. And we have updated all of our fiscal models, so they start with what actually happened in FY24, and then we model out based on the capital plans. And we really are focusing on the impact to our levels of working capital, our debt, and then making sure that those funds, in some cases, we have outside requirements such as bond covenants that we have to meet. So we're kind of balancing all of those things. We don't want working capital growing to a huge level. That means our rates are too high. We also don't want our debt growing so high that then it starts to eat away at our working capital because our debt service grows. And what we have done this year is we have put together kind of what the next 3 years look like. It's not in stone, and what we're approving or asking for direction on today is the rates for FY26. And what we'll probably do next year, and what we've done in the past, is kind of compare. So if I say today we're recommending a 4% increase for FY27, and then it turns out that we have to come back with a 5% increase, we'll be able to explain that and tell you what's going on and what's driving that higher than anticipated rate increase. So we'll have this 3 year as kind of a baseline, and we've done this before. And we'll just get your guidance and then move forward. The other piece that we'll be covering is some of the operating resource proposals. And there are more in the packet than we'll talk about in this presentation. Feel free to ask questions. I did include all of the resource proposals, or actually resource proposals or project charters for our capital projects. That's just for your information. We'll be coming back with a more detailed capital plan that includes those when we have the budget put together. And then also, just so you're aware, I got the sense from our last meeting that you didn't want to really see all of the replacement vehicles for Central Garage. So we do have some for the enterprise funds that are just standard, replacing an old vehicle. The resource proposals are in your packet. I didn't put them in the presentation. I won't talk about them unless someone has a conversation. I did put anything that was a new addition to the fleet. So under goal 1, we had just one resource proposal for the electric fund, and that was a nearly $22,000 increase in temporary wages for civil maintenance work. The intent of this was to use temporary wages rather than outside contract support, with the goal that it would actually save resources. Or we also, in some cases, have our operators doing some of this work. So, and I believe if anyone has any questions, that we have people in charge of these funds here. So if I can't answer them, they are here. The next one I mentioned during our general fund meeting. The electric fund is proposing purchasing an ROV. So this is a submersible, remotely operated vehicle that can go down and inspect underwater areas around the dam. This is one that would be used in addition by the fire department, and we would do jobbing between the funds, so the fire department would pay for the use. And I believe that the fire department might be the one to operate the ROV. Is that right, Craig? Okay, yes. So there will be some back and forth and shared expenses of this asset. But we do have to be very careful when it is an enterprise fund that the expenses related that are not related to that fund get reimbursed. And our next, under goal 5, we have an addition to the fleet, which is a boom pole grab auger digger derrick, which I can't tell you anything about, but it's apparently needed to, I believe, make our operations more efficient. And then we have increased travel and training with a focus on having our plant operators learn from other Southeast hydros, so kind of an exchange of knowledge there. And then improved protective gear for staff. So if you have any very simple questions, I can answer them. Anything more complicated, we have other people here tonight. And if there's no questions, then these will, at least for the first draft of the budget, be in there. Changes can be made at a later date as well.
So just for everyone's knowledge, so changes at a later date would require a motion, or?
They will require a motion once the budget is published.
Okay, just to be
Actually,
clear.
Melissa, can we go back, the big piece of equipment for 365, can we have someone tell me what that does? Is there someone here who does?
Ron?
It's kind of a funny name, but I know it has a real purpose. I'd just like to know.
Well, while Ron's coming up, I can kind of give a bit of an introduction, but it's going to be a boom truck for high voltage work, along with the ability to do some pole replacements, and yeah, you know it better than I do.
Good evening. My name is Ron Vincent. I'm the electric utility director here. So this piece of equipment's it's often referred to as a digger derrick. not the other things that were added on there, but it does have those as implements that are attached.
Okay.
The piece of equipment is essentially a boom truck that is used for doing, pole replacements, hot work on the lines, things like that. Right now, the existing boom truck that we have is not fitted or configured in a way that we can legally use it for the kind of hot work that we need to do.
Okay.
And so we default to using contractors that are quite expensive to do the same work. And so purchasing this piece of equipment is part of a larger kind of push to get further away from expensive contracted work. This piece of equipment will be insulated, unlike the existing one that we have, and so it'll meet OSHA compliance. And so we'll be able to do it in-house rather than rely on contracted
I
support.
like that.
So.
Thank you.
A quick question about it. I think I was reading that we have quite a few pole replacements coming up in the near future, so I'm assuming this will be pretty handy for all that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably one of our biggest weaknesses. Winds here can get 70, 80 plus miles per hour, and fortunately, we do a good job of maintaining this right now. I think we have at least, I think it's for this next budget, something like 40 poles that we're trying to replace. And when we put in the budget poles being replaced, it's not always necessarily one pole. It'll be one of those poles could represent a whole structure. So there's a lot more to it. But yeah, this piece of equipment will definitely cut back on costs. The contractors that we have on right now are extremely expensive, and it is way more efficient and effective to do it in-house this way. So
Yeah, I'm definitely for having our own equipment so we can maintain our own infrastructure,
Yeah.
so I'm for this.
thank you.
Okay, so the assumptions that have gone into the upcoming recommendations here and some of the charts that kind of pictorially show our fiscal models are a 3.5% increase for operating expenses. The 3.5% is in solid waste. Because that one uses a slightly different CPI metric, and the inflation tends to be a bit higher. A 5% increase for construction costs for capital projects, and the goal is to balance rates kind of with a focus on three different indicators. We have the debt to equity ratio, really focusing on how leveraged a fund is. Debt service is a percentage of operating cash flow. So that's really making sure that the fund is still generating enough cash after it's paying its debt service to be able to put into infrastructure. And then making sure we have adequate levels of working capital. This is a chart I update every year, and just showing the darker blue line is the median household income for Sitka, and the other one is taking what the median household income was in 2000 and just adjusting it for inflation. So you can see there's, it'll be off for a year and then it catches up. And right now it's right on. So just keeping an eye on that. So this is kind of a graphical representation of some of the key elements that we're looking at for the electric fund. This one has a little bit of data. In the next week's assembly meeting, Ron and I are going to be bringing forward a proposal to pay back the USDA RUS loan in full. They made a lot of promises around adjusting some of the extremely onerous requirements, and now that we're into it, they are absolutely not doing that. And it would require a significant change in operations for both finance and electric and take a significant amount of resources. We also, in the past 2 years, have brought in about the same amount of funding from the hydroelectric incentives, and so we do feel that we can afford to pay back this loan now. So you can see by the chart, so kind of where our working capital is as expected. If we pay this back in FY25, that red line shows our working capital at the end of the year. If we didn't pay it back, the green area is if we pay it back. So obviously after we pay it back this first year, our working capital is going to be lower because we'll be paying back, you know, a bit over $3 million. By the end of this chart, so by the end of 10 years, our working capital is back where it was and our debt level is lower. Yep.
I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I want to talk about that USDA RUS loan a little bit. I think you all probably remember that loan process took us about 2 years to get through, and a significant portion of the time was our legal talking to their legal and trying to work through the contract. Those loans aren't typical for municipalities. They're more for private utilities. So there were a lot of areas that we had questions about, some of them being things like if we wanted to or needed to adjust rates, those rates would be subject to essentially USDA's approval, and that took the charter granted authority away from the governing body, and trying to work through that got very, very complicated. And as Melissa said, there were a lot of, I would say, promises made on some reporting and some of the compliance measures that are not really panning out as we had been promised, but some of that stuff isn't as papered as we would like it to be. So again, not trying to get too far into the next assembly meeting, but that's a bit of our reasoning for that.
Yes, and we did just want to show the assembly during this discussion what that would look like. So overall, the fund is generating and growing its working capital and Ron has put together a very detailed 10-year plan. So this 10-year plan is pretty comprehensive. Some of the projects will be, you know, it might be that we're adding into for a bigger project, so we're not having big ups and downs. I think the amount of projects in today's dollars is around $3.5 million each year for the next 10 years. Again, the spend rate will actually be different, but that's what the intent is to appropriate. And then, you know, we are growing working capital so that when we have some bigger needs further out, we will hopefully be able to balance the debt and not have, and certainly the debt levels are improving over time here. There's no expectation that we would take on more debt in the next 10 years. We do have we don't have a grant award, but we do have a commitment. It's been announced formally for nearly $3 million for our Green Lake Phase 2 project. Right now, we really don't know where that's going to end up. That has not been included in any of these projections. But that would certainly help. That would eliminate any impact of paying back the USDA loan if that does come through.
Well, that was my question, I guess, before we look at rates, is paying off this USDA loan is that part of the calculus for an increase to rates, or that's not part of it?
The rates do not increase because of paying back the USDA loan. We'd be proposing the same rates. And in the future, if that grant does come in, you know, it's possible we could go lower than we are projecting. So, and the good news is that right now the rate increases are below inflation. So the fund is looking healthy. We definitely need to be working on the longer term capital plan because some of these far out big ticket items in this fund, we have to be considering those today, so that we're prepared for them in the future.
So let me ask a question on process. Are you looking for an approval on each one of these rates from the assembly before we move to the next one, or just a general, unless the assembly objects? I mean, what are you looking for here?
As long as there is no objection, if there's objection or discussion, please bring that up. If I don't feel like I have good feedback, then I'll try to get that, or if we need to, we could do a motion. So generally, I'm able to kind of get the general will of the body and
So
implement that, so.
if
So
I-
yes, we're looking at 2% for FY '26. And that's through '28. I had a couple typos there.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that for a minute, because going below inflation makes me nervous. And that what, experience, back in the late 90s, we had really low rates. I believe it was 6 cents a kilowatt hour. And there was talk about raising it then. And it got pushed down pretty hard. And at the time, as a newbie assembly person, I was like, okay, yeah, heck, everybody likes low rates. And that cost us bad by not taking, getting behind like that. And I know we had a Sustainability Commission meeting last night, and we've got some stuff on the horizon that's going to cost money. I mean, it's funny we say 2% because the assumption is our electrical consumption is going up 2% a year. And that's fine. Oh, no, it's not fine. And so we've got some big ticket items on the horizon, maybe more than 10 years out. And it strikes me as possibly short-sighted, going below the inflation rate.
I think one item here that you don't see in this 2%, so this is the per kilowatt hour. We are also continuing the proposed increase that we started last year on the customer fee. So that's generating I believe a couple $100,000. So that is in here as well. I'll go over that one in the next ones, but part of what we're doing is looking out. And this, with this along with the customer fee, our working capital after investing in capital projects is still growing. And I think that's where it's really critical, because you're right, and I've probably gotten you guys sick of the charts that show the flat, the almost 20 years of no increases. So, but we're also, I think I've also told you many times, a higher rate increase now means that we're able to do lower ones in the future. And we are coming off of many prior years where we did have much higher than inflation rates, so.
If I could, yeah, I was gonna say, I remember last year and the year before they were a little bit higher, so. I just wanna say thanks to Ron for the detailed 10-year, analysis with all the projects and everything. I think it's been a long time coming, and I appreciate that. And for now, I'm okay with the 2% across the board, because as you said, there's gonna be other ones added on, so.
John?
Yeah, we are very sensitive to that concern that Mr. Christensen brought up. I'm sure you may have seen in the news, local news recently, Ketchikan went through essentially the same thing we did. I think it was 2015, where we had to do a big rate increase because it didn't track along. Ketchikan's news was they needed a 35% rate increase to keep their utility alive, or they were going to be broke within a year. And I think they settled on a 12.5% increase a year for the next 3 years, I believe. We want to avoid things like that, but just a reminder from last year, we did do a 0% increase in the electric fund, but there's a 3-year plan for that. As Melissa said, the phased increase in the customer fee, and that's to try to I'll call it level the playing field for users. You know, you've got higher commercial type users. I know we're on an island, but we have island homes too, where the infrastructure is extremely expensive, and repairs and replacements of that infrastructure, the cost of it far exceeds the amount of revenue we collect on those. So trying to get that evened out, we're attacking that through the customer fee.
JJ.
Thank you. Yes, John, thank you for mentioning Ketchikan. Another thing I want to mention of our neighboring communities is Haynes. They had a transmission line break, and they're looking at 12 million, and so their rates, they're talking about right now, might be increasing by 40% for the short term, and maybe 70% for long term because of an unforeseen. And I think this 2% makes sense for us today with planned replacements, but what if something breaks? Because our infrastructure is at that kind of lifespan time. And I'm just concerned that we're not saving enough or positioning ourselves to do some emergency repairs. Thank you. For both our diesel backup generation and our primary hydro. I don't know what my suggestion is, but 2% just seems like we're not saving for the what ifs.
I think there's an easy way around that, and because I get it, I totally get it. We don't want to, go too low and not have money for emergencies. But if I remember correctly, Ron, in your calculations, and Melissa, does this include emergency, or is this just planned maintenance, or does it include an emergencies fund?
It does include, it's planned maintenance, but the level of working capital that you see growing here, that's all available in case of an emergency. So you can see it's hovering around 20 million. So there is some ability to address an emergency. The goal is to do the work as we go and avoid those emergencies, but.
I think would make sense to at least, I think we're having a conversation to look at increasing it somewhat, just because of exactly what JJ's talking about and Tor's talking about. I mean, inflation is higher, and we're not going to try and go above that. But I mean, last thing we want to do is then come back next year and say, well, it'll have to be 8. So, I think in this case, 2.5, 3, whatever, something that will get us closer to a more realistic number, as well as, I share everyone's concerns and listening to Ron. I mean, emergencies are going to get more expensive, not less, so.
I'm concerned that I'm not seeing any generation increase. This is all.
We do assume, kind of based on averages, slow so the model does include some assumptions for generation increase, but no, in terms of big ticket item investment for additional generation, that's not in here yet.
Yeah, again, I'm thinking back to when we raised the dam. It would have been really nice to have a bit more in the fund. It would have saved us a lot of heartache. So I'm not necessarily banging on the table saying we need to go higher, but it would make me more comfortable if we were a little closer to actual inflation.
And the other thing to point out is I'm generally, if the bodies, I've always been in favor of kind of getting the hard one first, because we can always have a lower. If we're finding that we're generating plenty of working capital, we don't want to generate more working capital than the fund needs. So we are using the CPI metric that we're using that was from December 31st was for Alaska was 2.3%. Would the Assembly be more comfortable doing a 2.3% this year and then looking,
Melissa, I had a question though, but I guess I'm trying to get my mind around this. A couple of years ago, we did hit those higher rates, and then we were gonna say it'll be a little lower. And now we're hitting that lower part and thinking we need to raise it. I mean, we had a higher rates increases a couple of years for a reason. And now that we're here, we're thinking we should add even more. I don't know, I just feel like, yeah, looks scary, that there's a 2% instead of 3 or 4, because we're so used to that. But I think that, I trust that your calculations and your assumptions and models incorporate emergency funding. And, you know, these are uncertain times right now, very uncertain times. And I wouldn't mind, you know, there will be other increases, by the way. It's not just this. This is one very small portion of the enterprise funds. In my mind, why don't we see what else we have before we try to start increasing this? That's just my opinion. If someone wants to vote or put a motion, that's fine. I probably would vote against it, but feel free to.
I have a quick question for you. So if you take into account the base customer charge, what would be I mean, would it be like 2.3% or something like that?
I didn't calculate that, I really should have. It would probably be close, yes.
Is there appetite for increasing above 2%? Okay, if we're going to go off to 2%, it looks like we need a motion.
And we can wait until the end, give you a little more time to think about it, and I can kind of come back around and make sure after we go through everything else, if that sounds okay.
Go ahead.
One final thing is, thank you, Kevin, for mentioning what we were, telling our ratepayers, that because of increased generation and increasing the dam, then we'd have to pay for that, and then it would settle out. But now we're looking at, a more detailed asset management plan for the transmission and distribution piece, and that's now where the concern lies. So it's these two separate pieces of our electrical system that are playing into this conversation about increasing rates, because it's not because of generation, but it's how to get those through the wires to your home, and looking at those pole replacements. To replace 40 poles or 40 series of poles in 1 year, that's just what's been identified as needing replacements. I'm sure there's many more throughout town that just haven't been, assessed lately to know that they're in need of replacement. So there's always that factor of, well, have we found the problem spots yet? And that's where I'm coming from in looking at this. A potential rate increase is with the distribution system.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying.
Anything else? All right, let's come back to this one, maybe.
All right. So this is just kind of a reminder of why we're doing the adjustment to the base customer charge. And it's really, this is kind of, in summary, this is the base customer fee recovers what the cost is to connect to the grid. So it doesn't have to do with generating the electricity. It's the meter reading and billing and customer service. And these rates were set, the ones before we implemented this year's adjustment, first year adjustment, were set in 2016 and hadn't been touched. And so this also, as was mentioned earlier, it makes sure that those user groups that cost us more to provide electricity to, that they're paying their fair share, and other user groups aren't subsidizing it, so. And then this chart just shows, what the rates were in '24, what they are now in '25, and then what they would be and what the increase would be for FY26. So next we have water. Both water and wastewater are you know, these charts do not have the debt going in the right direction. So they rely, both water and wastewater rely very, very heavily on debt. And there's some very expensive infrastructure that was put in a long time ago that needs to be replaced. And then in both of these funds, we have had major mandates that we've had to comply with or will have to comply with. So for water, it was the critical secondary water filtration. And then in wastewater, it's the effluent disinfection. So you can see here we need continued rate increases. Our working capital is not growing. So these rate increases are really the bare minimum and mean that we continue to rely heavily on debt. This is the low interest debt through DEC.
What's the big capital outlay in 2030?
For water, this is and this one I believe we have in here. This one is in here. It's a big water tank. We have it in here as grant funded right now. So this is one that we would have to make some pretty significant decisions on if we did not get grant funding on. So the proposed rates for the next 3 years are 6% a year. You know, again, if we have overages for a project, these rates could go up. This was pretty much as low as we could keep some of those base metrics that we're looking at where they need to be. You know, we've been working the past couple years on a master plan, so looking at that long-range plan. But there's still some items that we're digging into more, trying to decide, you know, do they have to happen, or is there a way to do them less expensively? These projections, like I said, for the water tank, it includes them but assumes grant funding. And you know, again, it's purely debt funded for any project that's over a couple $100,000. And this really is a different chart. So wastewater, though, is very similar, with the exception that its working capital is actually, you know, toward that 10-year mark is actually down. I think one important thing to note here is that the way the fiscal model works, you actually see more kind of jerky ups and downs on working capital, where in reality we are, because it shows the full cost of a project in 1 year, we're not necessarily spreading it out and the way it would really be spent or implemented. So we're really looking at more when that project would be appropriated. So more likely where you start to see it going down in 30, 32, it would be a more gradual slope. But you know, this one, I think that the big driver here is the effluent disinfection, which you can see that one happening. I believe that's the kind of spread out over these years here. So, and so for wastewater, we also have proposed rate increases of 6%. There are no new, I do not believe we're asking for any working capital for wastewater for this fiscal year's budget, but we will be, right now, we have a 7 million contingent appropriation for a DEC loan, and we will be asking for an additional 4 million more. This is certainly one that is listed high in our legislative priorities. Certainly, if that were to come through, we'd much rather spend grant money than debt, so. And we are, for both of these funds, we're looking at rates above inflation for the foreseeable future.
A question about when do we get to talk about the individual resource proposals or project charters that are in the packet? I think it's
Anytime
anytime?
you want to bring them up.
See, I think it's worth noting that something that was on the capital improvement program list, like Granite Creek Lift Station, was scheduled to be phase 1 done in 2032, but it recently went through a failure, and now it's on the list now. So if stuff is breaking 8 years before its scheduled replacement, I don't want that to be, atypical. Is there someone in the room that can talk more about that particular thing and what happened there, and if it could, if something like this is possible in the rest of the infrastructure?
Joe Swade, Environmental Superintendent. So Granite Creek had an electrical fire a couple months ago or 2 months ago. And
Yeah, is that something, is the condition of that lift station similar to the condition of the other lift stations?
yeah, they're like 40 years old. They're meant to last 20 years, but they're 40 years old.
Okay. So that doesn't give me a lot of promise that we won't have conditions like this happening with greater frequency. Unfortunately, that means we need to find that money somewhere. And that's going to stress our engineering staff and your staff to just be running literally between fires. And that's a bad deal. So I support our push towards asset management and really looking at and judging in the condition of things. I'm concerned that this is going to be happening more frequently, and rates that are 6% aren't going to give us what we need to meet the needs of our systems. Anyone else want to talk about?
Any more questions for, thank you. No one else on our rates?
I'll just say I'm okay with everything as presented so far.
I agree with JJ that it's, stuff's wearing out and that's natural, and maintenance and the question of how to pay for it's always going to be the situation. But I did read in here that, one of the things that's being looked at and being worked toward is how to extend the life of things that we have so that we don't end up having to replace them right away. Because, we can't afford to do all that. What would that rate increase look like if we're going to replace all the lift stations? And I don't think you want to replace them all at once anyway, because that's probably how we got to where we're at. So you kind of want to stage that. So, I think looking at the projections we have seems reasonable to me to stay where we're at. Scott?
I just have a question on preventative maintenance, like if it's the amp draw that set it on fire, and if it's 40 years old, like if you do continuity checks on the windings of the motor, like every year, every couple years, and you write that down, you would be able to see that, with the ohm meter, that this lift station is stressed, that the windings have lost some insulation, and you'd have a clue by having an invasive preventative maintenance aspect and attack stuff that you're not just staying awake at night waiting for it to fail.
And I'll just say that, I think we're seeing some changes. I'm seeing them since I've been on this assembly towards the asset management and better, better understanding of the infrastructure that we have. So I agree with you, Scotty, but I think that, what I'm seeing is that's starting to happen, so.
And that's exactly it. That's the value of asset management. I know it's fairly new to Alaska, and I'm really proud of the work that our team has done in that. I'll get you a little excited about the capital list that we've got coming forward. It's been expanded quite a bit to give some detail on these projects. They're all attacked on a risk basis. We can't get rid of all risk, but we're going to try to shed as much as we can. And having that intrusive preventative maintenance or sometimes non-intrusive inspections, and then logging that stuff and knowing what has been done and on what frequency it's been done, that'll help us to ease some of those concerns. I'm sure we can't always prevent an electrical fire like this situation at Granite Creek, but at least we can say we've done these intrusive inspections this many times and it was good. This is a one-off, but yeah, the asset management and the record keeping is really helping us make more data-driven decisions on where to go first.
All right, and next we have Solid Waste Fund, which for a number of years has been kind of one of the bad news funds. It's not as bad news this year. So we've had, a few things impacting this fund. This fund is impacted, it's largely contract driven, so inflation, all of our contracts are tied to inflation. So with inflation slowing, that helps. We are also getting a better sense and more efficiently using the compactor. I think our big capital projects that we have pending are expanding our biosolids landfill and then the Granite Creek Bridge repair. We also, for fiscal '24, started we set up how the budget and chart of accounts was organized so that we could track by function better. So that's why this year we're showing different rate increases for collections versus the transfer station and scrapyard. And so that has been very helpful. And we're still looking to, our working capital it's been positive if you include what's appropriated but unspent for capital projects. And we're still, this year, next year, probably going to be in the positive, even if you exclude the funds appropriated for capital projects. But what we really realized from analyzing the more broken down data is that we need a slightly higher increase for transfer station and scrapyard than we do for collections. So we have proposed, and the model has us in a good spot by doing a 2% increase in collections for the next 3 years and a 4% increase for the transfer station and scrapyard. And then I just wanted to, I think this kind of shows you, as much as the having to pay for the compactor was a little bit painful, we had to do it. You can see from FY23 to FY24, the compactor went into use in August of '24. It definitely took of FY24. It took a little bit of trial and error, and there was a learning curve to get the weights nice and heavy. But we are seeing a reduction in our off-island shipping. So I think that is a good sign. So any questions on solid waste? Okay, and next we have Harbor Fund. This one is above inflation for the foreseeable future. I think the good news is it's not as high above inflation as it was before we really did kind of a deep dive and focus on the condition assessments of the assets. and asking the question, how can we extend the life of these assets? So right now, the 4%, gets us, it builds working capital. There will still certainly be debt probably for when it's time to do, whichever comes first, either ceiling or crescent. And then when we get out to Eliason, but we won't be relying solely on debt, where I think the outlook we were looking at before, we were having to rely so much on debt that we were going to require significant increases just to meet the bond covenant. So we're in a better position, but it's still, it is still above inflation. And the work does continue on looking into our assets, and we just need to, this is one that will be more likely to have more significant adjustments in the future. So this is just kind of putting this whole picture. So with these rate increases as recommended, this is focusing on a normal utility bill. It doesn't have anything in here for scrapyard or transfer station drop-offs, but we're looking at an annual rate for this is a family with electric heat, an annual impact of $228 a year for utilities. And then harbors, looking at a 40-foot vessel, would be about $96 a year. So are there any questions? Does anyone want to go back to discuss any of the rate recommendations, or are we good with a starting point of what we have in the presentation?
I mean, I'm good with it as it is right now. Thank you for the work.
I see no appetite for going backwards.
Okay. Well, then we'll look forward a little bit. Our next budget meeting is the 27th. We'll be discussing the general fund. I have in here, and the intent has been to put the draft budget out at the end of this week. I can tell you that absolutely won't happen. The earliest it could be out would be Monday. But if the assembly is willing, I would propose getting it out to you February 18th. That will give you over a week with it before we have our budget meeting. You will have a better, more comprehensive product. This accelerated budget process, I think, is opening us up to, this budget is extremely complicated. There are so many different parts that speak to other parts that cross other funds, and I could certainly use more time with it, and I think we'll also be getting some outside information that will make it a lot more likely that what you get will not have to be amended. So if everyone's all right with that timeline, we will aim for getting that out on Tuesday the 18th.
Hey, Tim, before we move to our next agenda item, think we can take a break?
That was my suggestion. So let's take a break. Be seated when you're ready.
The flat statement that foreign utilities cost more is flat out not true. We paid to have ours put in.
We didn't.
We paid 100% to have ours put in. It has now about 10 people on it. The city has never put a dime. We paid for it. Transformer, they haven't put a dime into that system. They've done nothing but receive funds, but if we hadn't put that in, we would receive nothing.
Totally agree with you. It's the repairs that are costing it. It's not putting it in, it's the,
I understand,
we
but there's
assume it's
never
ours.
been.
Most islands, though, didn't pay to put it in. I know know Bamdarashni didn't. We didn't pay to put ours in, the city put it in.
We had to get an LID, so we paid to put it in, and I think that lumping it all together is very different. You've got ones that have long runs that are gonna have issues, and then you have ones that have short runs like ours, where, like I said, the city has never invested a dime in the electrical infrastructure for the Jamestown Bay.
Right.
And yet, there's now, I was thinking about it, there's 4 float houses, 4V, Dove Island, which is commercial, which I don't know how much they're putting in. Ring, I think, has 2. And it's honestly, it's money that's going to the electrical utility. They didn't do any investment for it. And I know we're not, I mean, we were told to get, we had to have it, you know, we had to pay to put it in initially. And so lumping all the islands together, I don't think is appropriate. Because, like I say, what extra fees are extra costs, you know?
I don't know a different way to differentiate. I can give the example, where was that, Whale Island or
All right, I think everybody's seated. Melissa, are you up again? Thank you. All right, I think we're done with item A. We're going to move on to item B. This is a placeholder for any budget items members would like to discuss. To begin with, Assembly members Carlson, Celine, and Yastad have each submitted a resource proposal. Are we going to flip a coin? How are we going to go here? We'll do with Mr. Celine first, I think.
I'll go before everybody starts yawning, because mine, I'm trying to be as succinct as possible, but politically, how it goes for this request stems from the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act that the President Trump signed in 2020. The last bit of that act just got put in the Federal Register in November. And that part of the act is going to require that in 2029, all new heat pumps, all new installs of refrigeration equipment must contain approximately 85% recycled refrigerant. This plan is fully a half a degree of the global 1.5 degrees, trying to not increase the global temperature by that. And 1/3 of that goal is through the management and transitions of refrigerants. That is trying to be stopped right now in the House of Representatives, and that's really an industry deal for trying to utilize the fluorine molecule in industrial man-made refrigerants. Propane is going to start to be used in refrigerants, and it currently is. And where I'm going with all of this is, without having somebody in the city that can reclaim and recycle refrigerants, the city I'm getting flustered now trying to be, trying to explain everything, but it's already in effect. So every system that's on the island right now, that current refrigerant has stopped being made as of January 1st. And so natural refrigerants, ammonia, carbon dioxide are all avant-garde in trying to solve this problem. But our hemisphere's largest fluorine mine is in Mexico. And that's part of the reason why they stopped the tariffs from Mexico for another month, so that the administration can learn what's really going on, even though they signed the bill into it. So if you look at all the heat pumps and all the refrigeration that the city owns, not being able to manage our own refrigerant and recycle it and keep refrigerant from machines that break for use in future, that's really what the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act was all about. And so my proposal here is to utilize a tradesman that has at least 5 years of self-employed troubleshooting. And what I mean by that is, you can't go to a 2 or 4 year refrigeration school and then just take a job without working with somebody that can touch machinery, look at machinery, and is just aware of amp draw, airflow stuff when you just walk into a building. Now, specifically, how this focuses in for me is the animal shelter request for $30,000 for replacing a direct digital controller. Well, years ago, more than 30 years ago, when I went to school about a block away from Honeywell, who makes direct digital controllers, my trade school was a union school, and they said, you're going to be freezing fish. You don't have to learn skyscraper controls. So when I went into the animal shelter and I saw the direct digital controller, I knew right away that the city got beat as far as putting in that when they built the animal shelter, and thinking that it was our asset management app that looked at the casualty and said, just replace it, instead of any Fred Flintstone heating or refrigeration clown would go, that doesn't seem right. So I took the blueprints from the animal shelter and I emailed them to a buddy of mine that builds 20-story buildings. and then he had his design team come back with a control that will work Tecmar Model 256 for $300 instead of $30,000. And that's why I gotta try to get a refrigeration guy in. And it's very specific that you have to have, a self-employed troubleshooting is more stressful than troubleshooting working for somebody else. And right after homicide detective divorce rates, that is where single operator refrigeration service company marital fall apart. And it's, you take the job home with you, and you only learn troubleshooting skills by being immersed 24/7 into it. And to get out of it for, you know, a happy family life, that is the person that we need to hire. And so if you look at a trade like in town here at $200 an hour, it's the same thing as trying to, you know, do our utility pole work in-house, or having Dennis fix a truck in-house. And the world's changing, and we're naked and afraid without having a refrigeration guy in the city, stashing refrigerants for use 5, 6, 10 years down the pike. So the first two parts of the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, that's where all refrigerants currently in use on the island quit being made January 1st. And so it's forcing people into recycling, and, you know, we're taking Freon out of the domestic units out at the, you know, but there's a lot more to it. But it starts really with Sitka having a practical factors tradesman that's willing to trade off not earning $200 an hour for less, because he's gonna have weekends off unless something breaks and stuff. But we have a set amount of equipment in the borough, and it's not like being a 24/7 service guy. However, you have to have the 24/7 service under your belt in order to just go into the animal shelter and look at it and go, my God, $30,000 for a thermostat for a one-zone, one-story building, and actually put it on the paper. So that's where I'm coming from with my chicken tracks on there, and I'm standing by to answer any questions.
So, Scotty, do I understand that you think that there's somebody in Sitka who can do this already?
There's a lot of people, but like from a human resources aspect, it's a whole new category about who wants to have low blood pressure and still attack troubleshooting. And, you know, and it's $35 an hour versus the risk of self-employment. And there are aspects to it where it's a calming factor to have a set amount of potential casualties instead of a wide array of casualties, where whether it's melting ice cream or melting fish, refrigeration is always 24/7 unless you have a big enough crew that you can give guys the weekends off. And then I'm back to what I personally know, that right after homicide detectives is refrigeration service, and that's fully 1/3 of the world's goals of keeping the climate from heating up is from refrigeration guys. And yeah.
A question, so if I'm reading this correctly, what you're saying is that back in the NAFTA, about $130,000 a year with benefits, this position would pay for itself.
Yes, it would. And, you know, if it would look at being able to help on projects that they have to bring in other contractors, you know, because just the timetable, they need more than just one guy. But the training, you know, and it's much more than the 130 that you get back when you know, do an analogy of Dennis fixing a truck, or our own linemen doing our own jobs. And I'm pretty sure that Melissa, that's about $130 with the benefits being paid in. And then there's another aspect, like if this person happened to have a partner that was already in the city fold with family insurance, then that $130 goes down to about 90 grand a year because he's already covered or she's already covered with a spouse that's already in the borough.
About how many heat pumps that do you know of that the city has on our facilities or school facilities? So this person would.
Been a long time since I've worked on them. The performing arts, maybe 7 there. I'd have to get back to you on that. But like, you're really, like the Blatchley dehumidifier is the one that needs to have preventative maintenance looked at, and you got to have your finger on the pulse on that before, so the walk-ins, all of that.
So Marine Services Center.
The Marine, that's another one. The Marine, see, that's ammonia, and that's another aspect. And then the Marine Services Center, if you ever want to have an entertaining read, file the Freedom of Information Act and see what the city's gone through with that from the initial building in 1984, and then all the experimental panels, and then the electric defrost, and then the city coming back and having to go hot gas defrost because all these experimental panels actually let moisture in. They got little subnotes in there that are Comedy Central. But ultimately, having the knowledge, even if you don't have ammonia skills, there's, yes, it could be, and I would like to look at the maintenance record with Wyatt Refrigeration, and I personally know that the city has been led down the wrong trail in condenser sizing and then having to change out the condenser, and there's a lot more to that Marine Services Center. We'd like to have a little evaporator head that makes flake ice for the trollers. That was suggested back when staff wanted to take away 4 parking spots from Thompson Harbor and put a Scotsman ice machine in there for $100,000. And then the harbor masters came to me at that time and said, please stop this. And so I was able to present that the city had put up fictitious labor rates to keep this non-commercial ice maker going so that sport boats could have a very low quality of ice. And then we tried to suggest put an ammonia evaporator head flaker in the city cold storage building, which could easily make and store ice for delivery over an auger right off and down, and then charge guys for it. But that's part of the contract between Sitka Sound and the co-op of trying to stop any other fish pimps from competing against them. But I got you, Tim.
No problem. Any other questions for Scott before we open it up for?
I want to hear what John has to say.
In what capacity?
Yeah, I really am just waiting for guidance on this one. It's, we've got a cost to it. It sounds like Mr. Celine has done his business case on it, and I'll be looking for the Assembly's guidance on where we want to head with it.
So, you don't have any strong objections?
I mean, the only objections I would have to any FTEs is the cost of having an FTE. I mean, that's across the board. I mean, I think we're going to have a tight budget this year, but that doesn't diminish the value of what he's presenting. It's I think he's given the information, and we'll be looking to proceed as guided.
I have a question for John. Do you know how many heat pumps the city has between our buildings and the school's buildings?
I think that guy does.
Mm-hmm. So it'll be helpful for me to understand the scope and if it is truly a full-time position.
Yeah, Connor Dunlap, maintenance superintendent. Between our city facilities and our school facilities, I believe 9 have heat pump systems. As far as individual units, we're probably somewhere around 25 to 30 heat pump units. Yeah, and then just to speak to one thing, if I can, from from Scott's presentation with the animal shelter specifically. Just to clarify that a little bit, Scott has been helpful in providing some information with how we could get that system repaired. As far as the resource proposal that was put forward, an aspect of that was an evaluation of how we can improve that system. Something we're looking at doing holistically throughout our city facilities is trying to update our DDCs, our digital direct control, so that we can have remote monitoring. With a limited maintenance staff, it gets really cumbersome, especially with now taking on school building maintenance, to do daily walkthroughs, daily visits, be monitoring all of these things. And so those are expensive systems to install. So to have that remote monitoring aspect, that is a large portion of that resource proposal, in combination with looking at how can we make that facility improved. And that facility is not a heat pump, by the way, so.
I think I might have some questions for you, Connor.
Okay.
Do we, because the part I'm just not sure about is, this is for an FTE at this point. Are they going to have enough work just on HVAC systems and heat pumps to keep themselves busy? And if not, do you need more help with your maintenance staff to help maintain our buildings? And could you see this FTE being a multi-role, I guess?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. I don't know if the business case has fully been fleshed out in order to say this would save us money. It's true there are periods of time when we spend a lot of money on contracted services to repair these systems. Currently, we do not have any kind of recurring preventive maintenance contractor. There's no contract in place where we're able to look at, how much are we spending monthly on these costs. I think an individual performing these services, if they were capable, if they were competent and had the experience that Scott is proposing, if we were to find an individual that had that ability, it would be beneficial. It would be helpful. I don't know enough to say that there's someone in this community that can fill that role for us. We could certainly keep them busy with other projects. I mean, yeah. I mean, our as far as maintenance goes, we'll take 10 FTEs if you want to give them to us.
I guess maybe, I'm not sure if this is even plausible. Could we pay for schooling, sending an existing FTE off to learn this stuff, to be able to do it in-house? I don't know if that's possible. It's just kind of spitballing some ideas, I guess.
Yeah, again, I think there's value in that idea. The years of service actually working in the industry that ideally Scott's proposing, having someone with some of these years of doing that work to come in and be able to lead us in a direction that we are already kind of going with having these heat pumps and installing these new systems. But I don't know heat pumps, so it would be hard for me to for me to know what level of experience to expect this person to have before we say, okay, you maintain all our heat pumps.
Okay. All right. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, Scott's made his case because I don't know, we have it at our fingertips, but I have a pretty strong, if we went back and asked to look up how much we spent on the various heat pump contractors in Sitka in the last year, it's gonna be pretty close to this amount. I mean, I don't know for a fact, but I know I've had work done and I know how much it costs. And so, and if having somebody on staff would prevent us from, not just from having to call them because they can do the work, but to prevent the problem in the first place. which might be a little hard to track because if they don't break down, because we're keeping them from breaking down. But to me, maintenance and prevention saves us a huge amount. And if I'd be willing to give it a shot at this rate, see if we can really get somebody. And I think there's a distinct possibility. So we would say we can't find anybody willing to work for that. And okay, nice try. But I doubt we're going to get much pushback from folks saying that on maintenance and preventative maintenance and repairs in-house that we just save money on. And the number of heat pumps that we have is only going to go up. It is I mean, all you can do is go down to Ace and you can see that they're selling them self-install ones now. So I'm willing to give this a shot. So whenever we're done talking, I'll be happy to we have to put forth a motion on this, and I'd be happy to
We don't
center
have
one.
to, we don't have to do a motion. We can,
Okay, well, I mean, so in that case, I'm willing to give this a shot.
well, I just have a question for Melissa. So how would you plan to budget this? So is it paying for itself or is it costing?
I would discuss with Connor and see if there's anything in the building maintenance budget that can be reduced. I would imagine there's some level of contract services that we would reduce if we were switching this. This would go into the building maintenance fund, and then that is allocated out, and this particular position, probably we would, it'd probably be fairly heavily allocated toward school assets because that's where a lot of the heat pumps are. And so we would have to also kind of get that figured out.
Okay, so I think the question in front of us is, are we willing to advance this through this budget process as is? And if, I should have mentioned it at the beginning, we don't need a motion as long as Melissa gets the sense of the assembly being in favor of something or disproving it, then that's all we need to do. We can do motions if we think we're finding ourselves divided on it. But I mean, it's a simple question. Do we want to continue this through the process? I mean, obviously, we have an opportunity to take a good hard look at it at the end, and if it doesn't make sense, we won't do it then. Any objection?
I don't object. I think Scotty made a really good case. It makes total sense. But again, yeah, I'm not a heat pump guy either, and it would be nice if we could include this, but then maybe if you guys could go back to the drawing board and find out if you can estimate that we would actually save money on this. That would be very helpful in my final decision.
But Connor, don't write the job description so this person only works on heat pumps.
Thank you. Melissa?
And just one final note on this one. So you're aware, because this is an internal service fund, it goes out everywhere. So a late change will be very complicated.
And if I can add another piece too, that JJ brought up the job description. We will have to work on that. There's some pieces we'll have to get in place, and this would be a represented position too, so we won't necessarily be able to just set the rate. That will be a mandatory subject to bargaining too, so we'll have to see where the wage ends up after the job description is written and incorporated into the bargaining unit.
I just had one comment on Chris's for training. I'm trying to put together a thing that our building guys can go to different training, like train seminars in Madison, Wisconsin, troubleshooting stuff, because 90% of refrigeration maladies involve electricity, not the loss of gas or brazing or pressure tests and stuff. And that's, all part of it once you start getting used to troubleshooting from an environment with a whole room full of guys in your same boat, and the curriculum takes you through how you find your power consuming devices and blah, blah, blah. And that would enhance the city all the way around, going back to checking the lift station, do a continuity check on that motor, it could just be applied all over. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention on the city cold storage, the whole thing about ammonia is you have to have a human being drain the low pressure vessels of wax that builds up from heat of compression. And that is where you got to wear a mask and you got to have human beings do it. And so it's a little bit different. The natural refrigerants, ammonia and carbon dioxide, are coming back into play because of this fluorine thing is the bonding agent in artificial refrigerants. And going to natural refrigerants, you can alleviate that. But what is your problem? You got CO2 that's 3,000 PSI, doesn't work above 75 degree ambient. And then you got ammonia, which is, I've been trying to get the fire department to have simulated tipping over the ammonia receivers from a little earthquake on Catlian and touch smoke bombs off and see the smoke go up to Blatchley, just so that people could be aware of when those receivers tip over, this is what's going to happen, you know, just in the awareness of refrigerant.
Thank you.
I have one more quick question. I know what you mean when you say refrigeration and heat pumps, air-to-air heat pumps, but can you tell the general group why refrigeration is how air-to-air heat pumps work?
If you can understand a carburetor or an injector, taking a solid column of liquid fuel that's pressurized with an injector pump and then atomized so that it could be exploded adequately in the cylinder, and then you pushes the crank and you go uphill. With refrigeration, that is the same as when you sweat and your body cools off because now you're secreting 98.6 water out of your body, and then the air evaporates it. So your heat pump is utilizing the friction from the compressor in rejecting the heat into your house, whereas your beer cooler is absorbing the heat from the beer and rejecting it outside into the bar. And yeah.
Wow.
And you know, at 3 months of psychometrics in refrigeration school, and when I told the instructor I could teach this course in 3 hours with, anyway, yeah.
All right, are we ready to move on? Ms. Carlson, we'll put yours up next.
Down the line, yes. The research proposal I put in is referring to Visitor Enhancement Fund and Commercial Passenger Vessel Fund. So something we haven't yet talked about in this budgeting process. Looking at something we, as an assembly, discussed in September, I believe, as a discussion directed item about visitor industry data collection as one of the outcomes from the Tourism Task Force findings. So it's just putting what we said we were going to do in September into the budget proper. We're maybe going to be a year behind in that cycle, but this is the formal, I guess, research proposal to do those studies. So that is 2 studies, community survey through the phone lines, and then an economic impact study through an intercept survey that way. So the total number is $140,000 for those 2 different methods.
When I read this, I was thinking, like when I'm in the back of an ambulance and I'm going to do something, either trying to find using a test or putting a line in saying, okay, is what the answer to this procedure or test going to change what I do with my patient? And if the answer is no, then I don't do it, because it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to change what I'm doing. And that's kind of my question here is, okay, if we do this and we get these data, will we do anything different, or will we be able to do anything different? Like if the tests come back and say, you know, we've got not enough tourists on these days, or too many tourists on these days, do we have the ability to change that, to make those changes depending on what we learn? And if the answer is no, what's the point? And so that I just want to make sure that we're not gathering this data so we can talk about it with no intention or, frankly, ability to make those changes. Does that make sense? And so that's my concern here, is that, not that I don't think this would be valuable, it's and really interesting, but can we make changes to what we're doing based on it?
I would say yes, because that was one thing that was really challenging for the Tourism Task Force. I went to all of those meetings, and we do now have a tourism commission charged in asserting needs for this industry. And with our Visit Sitka contract, we can target the use groups that we want when we know, who's here and maybe how to grow those conventions and shoulder season visitors, as we say we want to do. And then through the community survey, we have these questions on quality of life. We can really kind of pinpoint the needs and the stress factors and then update that in our TVMP program. And through TVMP, through that MOU we have with the industry, or potentially do another one with a larger sector of the industry. Also, the port communities groups around Southeast, they need data, they need to know what's happening currently. So I would say we have at least 3 avenues to improve our offerings to visitors and the quality of life for locals based off of gathered information.
Kevin?
Thank you for explaining that, JJ. It's really helpful. I like this a lot, but tours kind of thought is where I'm thinking right now. But this is a one-time thing, and if we're splitting it between the funds, that makes it more digestible. I'm just concerned about the overall budget. Reason why I agreed to the last resource proposal is because there's a high chance it's going to be a net zero. Because of, we haven't really talked about this much, but not taking political side or anything, but the new changes at the federal level have put grants and funding from the federal government into question, and that we have a large portion of our budget is based on federal grants, and I believe we'll get most of them, but we don't know. We don't know what we're going to get. So that is very concerning to me. And then along with that, taglines, global financial instability, along with, so that could affect people's buying habits when they're here. And then the ballot proposition. Those are 3 things that are really got me very concerned about this budget season, which is wanting me to lean more on the fiscally careful side, conservative side, as you might say. So I like this, but and I think it's really good value. It brings a lot of good value. I'm just not 100% sure that I feel comfortable spending that right now. It's like I want to say yes to everything, but I don't think that we can. And I think that, well, like when we had the other resource proposals in the other earlier budget meetings, I kind of basically said yes to everything because I figured we're just going to see where we end up and kind of pick out, because basically everything that's listed is a need. So I guess my thought is I like this. I wonder if we can hold off a year. I don't know. It's so hard to make these decisions at the beginning when we don't know where the budget's going to be. I don't want to pass a deficit budget. And I know, we've been talking about how we have so much money in the past, but we really don't. We consider all the factors that are going on, increased inflation. And these uncertainty things really have cast a shadow over my mind as far as our financial situation in Sitka. And I feel like we need to practice all prudence and attention to make sure that we are careful with the money that we have. So all that to say, I'm not sure, and I have questions about this.
Mr. Yustat.
So this is something that I really did want to see being a part of the task force, because it was something that was asked by the task force and a lot of the public is we need better data. And I'm not sure how many have been paying attention to lovely social media, but it is a reoccurring theme from both sides that we need better data. And this is the way to get it. And it's third party, it's not the city. And that was kind of why a lot of data that has been presented keeps getting, saying that it's not good, is because they think that it's biased. So I thought this would be a great avenue. It's third party, it's not city involvement. It is someone else coming in, collecting the data, presenting a report. I was hoping to have all this before a potential citizens initiative so everyone could make well-educated choices instead of going off of speculation and rumors. So I feel like we're a little late on that now, potentially, but that doesn't mean I don't want to keep moving forward with this, because I think it's beneficial having this kind of data, the community sentiment, the economic impact stuff. I started referring to Junos that they had done recently, and it was quite eye-opening. So I think having our own would definitely be beneficial. I think coming from the two funds that it could be coming out of doesn't make me feel too bad, because I definitely share your sentiment, Kevin, that I'm scared spending money, and then here I'm about to talk about my resource proposal next. So yeah, it's awesome. But just coming from these two funds, I feel a little more comfortable with it. One being funds that are hard to kind of touch anyway, and then others coming from bed tax visitors. So I feel somewhat comfortable budgeting from these two funds, but it's something that I support. You know, I've wanted it ever since the task force recommended it. So it's something that I think needs to be done, but I definitely understand everyone's hesitation as well. So
Yeah, I'm not diehard against it or anything. I mean, I'd consider leaving it in, like I said, and then we'll see where we are when we get the final numbers in.
Yeah, the fact that it's coming from those funds, which are both directly from the visitor industry, it does make me feel a lot more comfortable with it. I mean, to me, this is a natural, I mean, it almost has to come from those funds, and both of them, well, the Visitor Enhancement Fund technically isn't restricted. It should be. I mean, it should be based on things that directly relate to visitors. And of course, the Commercial Passenger Vessel Fund, I still miss CPAP. If it fits that, fine. And like I said, they're both somewhat restricted, and so having it from those funds honestly doesn't really, and assuming we haven't overspent them already, I would be comfortable leaving it in there until Melissa does her, whatever she does on her computer, and we see the final numbers.
Go ahead.
I don't disagree with the studies. It's been a topic throughout the Port Communities group. We've even discussed how we can do this regionally. If one person hires a contractor to do these studies, there may be some sort of economies of scale where we can use the contractors, and that's still in the works. But I guess this is kind of a question. The RP says the community survey over the 2025 summer season, which essentially starts in May, we won't be able to obligate these funds until after July 1st. So if it's something that's going to take this summer, it needs to come from this fiscal year funds. And I'd be very concerned with trying to get an RFP or an RFI together, not having an organized and an active tourism commission yet, and not having a tourism manager on board or a TBMP program set up yet that it can feed into. I would hope that this is something that could be for maybe the 2026 travel season. I know the appetite is to have it now, but if we're talking the 2025 summer season, I mean, the last boat is showing up in about 12 weeks from right now. So trying to get a procurement package together with this current year's fiscal funds might be a challenge.
Are you referring to the community survey or the economic impact survey?
The economic impact survey, that's the one that looks like it would be during this 2025 season.
So yes, push that to 2026, correct. And then the summer season and end of the season phone survey to locals would be October or November in next fiscal year.
You know, I think you said earlier, this is a one-time thing, and I mean, this sort of data is not much use if you don't have some longitudinalness to it. So I would hope to see that we establish a process here going forward where we are surveying people on an ongoing basis so we can be alert to the changes more quickly as opposed to reacting to them much later. So, you know, I would hope that we see this as valuable information, but, you know, a single snapshot of information is much less valuable than a series of pieces of information that give us better data. I mean, if we could go back 2 years and get this data, we would see kind of where our trends are going and how we're headed. So, you know, I think I'm with Tor. It's coming out of the funds that naturally would do this. I agree that there's some issues with this, but, you know, I think the flaw was in the fact that we basically said we wanted to do this in September and we didn't authorize anybody to get moving on it. So this is that process, and so I'm comfortable doing it at this point in time. So, but I mean, let's not stop with one. I mean, one isn't much use.
Okay, so if we are interested in moving this forward, I think the question is what kind of split between visitor enhancement and commercial passenger vessel? Do we want to see it be 50-50, 75, 25, 50-50? What does the group think? 50-50?
50-50 sounds good.
Okay? Yeah, what you need? Melissa and John. Got another one that pays for itself down there, Chris?
No, not really. So yeah, this is something that's actually been kind of quietly discussed for quite some time. Just as our marine infrastructure has been changing and growing here recently, it's been on my mind a little bit as a liaison for GPIP and harbors, that we kind of have some marine infrastructure that isn't all living under one roof, and there's actually quite a bit of infrastructure that we have that isn't. And many cities and municipalities that have this type of infrastructure at our size have created either a port authority or a port district. So we kind of started looking at this a little while ago, and I had a sit-down meeting with John, Stan, and Gary about is this something that we want to pursue and what that potentially could look like. It's it's something that is, I think, worth looking at, bringing all of our assets under one roof and one manager. It doesn't really save any money, I don't think. But I think as a management style or system, it might be beneficial. And it is one of the biggest things. It's going to be a long process. It's a big process. That's why there's, what did we have here, 50,000 for potential consulting fees or legal fees, or costs, I guess. Basically, that is going to be for looking at potentially combining our Port Commission and then GPIP board into one singular board or commission, Port Commission, and then having a new FTE come online as a port director that would oversee all these different assets. I set the wages and everything up, just kind of looked at the Public Works Director position, thought it might be kind of within that sort of jurisdiction, but I ultimately wanted to leave that up to John and staff for truly setting the wages, but that was just kind of what I chose moving forward here. But I think the idea is trying to bring all these assets under one management. Because a lot of what I have seen being the liaison for a couple of these different assets is sometimes they're not all on the same page, and we're kind of sitting there chasing our tail. In fact, I'm kind of dealing with that right now with two of our assets, and one board not being on the same thought process as the other. And being the liaison between the two has made it so I can kind of help liaise and be okay, but that might not be what's going to happen here in the future. So I guess I'm kind of looking at trying to set our assets up for success and consistency through their management into the future. A lot of these port assets are changing here very soon. You know, our seaplane base is going to be expanding here quite a bit. Our airport is expanding. We have, you know, recently had the GPIP dock come online that's been operational here for a little while, but it's still somewhat of a new asset for the city. And then we also now have a haul out facility coming online where obviously we don't know how it will be operated at this point. So I felt this might be a good time to at least have this discussed. I wanted to bring it forward to the entire body here so we could discuss it, because it's more than just me or one other assembly member looking at this. So yeah, sadly, I don't think it's going to save us really any money, but it might help with management of these assets. And then maybe for John for having, I believe there was going to be a few less people under you, or I forget how, yeah, we had I had actually kind of dropped this considering everything that was going on recently and my concerns over this budget, but through conversations it was kind of brought to my attention that if there is a time to do this, that maybe this is the proper time. Stan is retiring here shortly, so there's a bit of a management change there, so it felt opportune, I guess. So.
Tor.
Question for you here. Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably where we're going, and we've known this for a while. Yeah. My thought is that if we try to approve it this year, which is what, 5 months now from now, I don't see how we could get it done in time. And so what I am maybe going to suggest is that we approve the $50K for the consultant and the process to develop it over the next year, so it's up and ready, shovel ready for lack of a better word, next fiscal year, because it's going to take us that long to figure out the details. And so I would be happy to say, yeah, we want to at the very least really explore this and honestly go ahead and figure out what it would look like for next fiscal year, because it's going to take us that long. Even if we approve this year, there's no way we're getting it online this year. There's just no way. And so I think it's a little bit premature, but I could definitely see allocating some money in the budget to facilitate that process so it's ready for next year.
Oh yeah, that was definitely, sorry John, that was definitely something that I knew kind of going into this in our meeting. We had talked that this will take quite some time to make happen. I guess my thought process behind the FTE showing the salary is I want to show the salary. I want everyone to see, you know, what the full potential expense might be of this project. So that's why I wrote it in there, but I definitely had the same thought that you are, that FTE may not come online this next fiscal year, just because it will be a long process. So, yeah.
We're going to go to John.
I try to stay neutral on a lot of these issues, but I will say, and sorry, Stan, for exposing your business, but he did it first. But I think the benefit of the timing right now is that right now the harbor master position is a department head position. Under this proposed structure, which has been studied somewhat. We did a harbor rate study this past year, and that was one of the things that was recommended is get a port director, not necessarily a port authority, we're not that big, and then pull these port assets underneath it. But with the harbor master as a department head position, I would, when Stan goes, I need a replacement, and if I make that replacement a department head position, then say, but never mind, now I'm gonna bring another department head in, and I'm gonna not make you a department head now, here's your new department head, that could create some confusion, and if we're gonna post the job here soon, I think it would be good to post it at what the desired end state is, and then look at opportunities. I mean, it would still be a harbor master job with essentially the same responsibilities, just not at the department head level. And if we bring in a strong port director with experience, they can manage this project themselves with some consultant support too. I mean, it's a big project, I'm not gonna lie. I've talked to some of you about it. It makes me really nervous because there's code changes that are gonna have to happen. There's Title II and GPIP, and what are we gonna do with boards and commissions? And we'll be beating Sarah's door down on how do we combine these? What does membership look like? New charters for the commissions. But knowing that it's gonna be a multi-year project, having a point person to run that, so I'm not running it, would be wonderful.
Mr. Mosier.
Thank you, Tim. So I like the idea that I was surprised to see it in as a resource proposal. I thought that would be more something we'd have as a discussion item or something like that. But I like the idea. I don't like the idea of another, $220,000 a year. And my concern there is that someone who has that experience to do all that is going to want my concern is they're going to want double that. You know what I mean? They're going to come in and say, well, I was in charge of this, so I should get this. And so we just have another position that is not filled. Having said that, I'm open to consider it and think about it and spend some money consultant to think about it. I mean, yeah, because the experience needed to run all these things. And I do agree that, John, you need some help there and to kind of manage all this. There's a lot going on, and it would consolidate it. That's great. My biggest concern here is the two things. One, the additional $220,000 a year. And second, the fact that I don't think we're going to get a qualified person for that much. They're going to want more. That is a concern of this, mine. It's a labor market these days. But I am definitely all for thinking about it. And I just don't know if I'm ready to put down that much money, because it's a firm commitment. We say yes on this. We're just saying we're going to do $220,000 minimum permanently, an additional, and we haven't even seen the bottom line yet. So that's a concern of mine. I don't know what to say. You know what I mean? I don't have an answer right now. I can't give an opinion on whether I like this or not. But I think it's a good idea we're thinking about.
Ms. Haley.
I would note that this one, it would probably be most appropriate to break up this position and budget it between airport, harbors, and GPIP. So in terms of the impact on one enterprise fund's budget, it's not going to be the full 270 here hitting harbor fund or airport fund. It would be broken up. We'd have to figure out an approach to allocate that.
That's good to know. Is there going to be any eliminations, any staff eliminations with this, if we do this?
John.
I mean, if I can answer that first, I don't anticipate any. And then some other points to consider. If not this, I think there's also going to have to be other staff additions in the future. So, as Mr. Eustad said, there's a haul out about to be built, and kind of a rhetorical question, who's in charge of the haul out right now? Everybody does I don't know. A seaplane base is going to be built, and who's in charge of the seaplane base? Yep. We know where it's going to go. Yep. So we're going to need the support in running those facilities. We're going to have employees to run the haul out, run the seaplane base. As the airport expands, what are we doing there? We've got a project that's going to take place at the Marine Services Center with a new seawall. Who's managing that project coming on board? So there's a lot going on in our just overall port infrastructure, and it's going to need some help.
Yeah, I get that. And sorry, Tori, I just want to finish my thought, if you don't mind. I totally get it, John, and I support it. You can't be doing all these new things online. John can handle it. Or we'll just add another, person that so you have like 20 managers of all these different things. So it makes sense. Strategically, it makes a lot of sense. I'm just concerned about the finances and the fact that Melissa said we can split it helps a lot. But then I'm also concerned about, like, we have another manager. I'm having a real hard time with this 220,000 number. I just think they're going to want more. A qualified person. People seem to want to get paid a lot these days, and I think they'd want more. And then paying someone a lot of money, and then we'd still need worker bees to run these things. Yeah.
JJ.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that about the splitting of the enterprise fund. That was going to be my next question. I think once we look at how this will work through the numbers, because I did that, I became a lot more comfortable with this idea. And the number of direct reports that would be reduced to the administrator, the person there to assist with contracts and leases would help legal out quite a bit. Not bigger Rachel, huge help for Rachel, because that is primarily what the airport is leases. There's a lot of that too with the two groups that are in the Marine Services Center. That's a lease. We don't know who's operating the haul out. It might be a contract. It may be something else. So it's a person to navigate through all of that paperwork. And so that's a unifying factor is contracts and leases and someone there that understands that kind of working waterfront and making that work consistently between all of our assets. So I think it will streamline things, pay for itself in a way by reduced load on two, three key people, and just even out that report triangle that stresses out our administrator quite a bit. And when we've noticed, or I've noticed, when we build things, a year or two later, we get an FTE because now we need someone to run it. So we're just learning from those past situations and doing it proactively. And it takes a while to kind of coordinate this, and this is something we can do now to not hamstring ourselves in the future with a seaplane base, a bigger airport, haul out, as this group has mentioned. And the key piece that I heard tonight was the timing that John said about that director level and a harbor master retiring and how to make that work does make it seem relevant to this fiscal cycle. Understanding the stress that would put a lot of people under for all the changes that need to happen. But we do need to talk about at some point too, with that haul out at GPIP, it's all that land may or may not be spoken for, and that asset is to dissolve in its current structure once that marker has happened. And that's a piece of another conversation, not necessarily this one, but something that's on the horizon. Even if we don't do our work as it comes, we get a lot of things piled up, and then it's not surmountable. So I think there's maybe another level of investigation here, perhaps a discussion directive item on an upcoming assembly meeting to really parse that out, like what percentage from each of these enterprise funds, so we can get a little bit more comfortable with that and discuss it further. So tonight, absolutely in support of that contractor and still pretty keen on looking at an FTE for this next budget cycle. A point to you, Kevin, 220 is not the take-home salary, that would be the all-in. So,
That's my concern. That's what their benefits and stuff,
But
so.
what other directors, okay, yeah,
No,
we
my
can have
point,
that.
my concern is that that's not gonna be enough, I don't think, to get a qualified person. But I'll put it this way, sorry, I'll just say it and then I'll drop it. John, I believe that you feel that you need this in order to function properly as administrator and to accomplish the tasks that the assembly and this community have put on you, especially relating to all these new projects that are coming online. And it makes sense, makes strategic sense. So I will support this. I just have grave concerns about, how we're gonna pay for it. My concern is we'll post it and the person won't want enough. They'll want more, we'll have to give them more, and then we'll turn around and you're gonna have to hire even more people to run all this stuff. But you're doing what we asked you to do. You're getting grants, you're getting things done, you're getting projects done, and now it's time to get these things managed. So I get it. I get it. I'm just concerned about the finances. So I will support this.
Let me recap what I think I heard from you, and you tell me if I'm right. So what you would like us to do is approve it, even though we know we're not going to have a port district in place July 1st. And so you're going to, when July 1st rolls around, you're going to go out, search for the position, and when you hire them, you're going to say, build your district or department. I mean, your job is to make this happen. Is that fairly straight what you're saying?
That's correct. Job number one is build the port district, and here are the assets that are going in it. Here are the boards and commissions that you need to interact with, and build the structure out.
That makes more sense.
And actually, Chris, I was hoping you would say it would pay for itself, because actually, I think over time it will. And it's funny, because I think our budget process is very kind of myopic, right? We look at this year. We look at this impact, and we don't necessarily look down the road and say, down the road, this is going to take place. I mean, sometimes we do. We bought a boom truck or we're buying a boom truck for the electric department because we know that down the road it will pay for itself. Does it pay for itself right in this budget? No. Will it over time? Yes. And I think this is a position that will do that too. So, if we look down the road 3 years and this thing is up and running, I would predict that it will have paid for itself by that point in time, in efficiencies, if nothing else, and in the ability to get stuff done and things that happen. So, I think we need to be looking down the road as we make some of these decisions. Yes, is it hard in the short term? Is there ever going to be a year where $220,000 is not a significant amount of money for this city? I would say no. But is it an investment that we should make in our ports, and particularly as we're adding more assets? I would say yes. And so I'm going to say yes to this, because while it's hard to swallow at the moment, down the road this is going to make a big impact on how this whole community functions. So I do think it pays for itself in the long run.
Or we could sell the ports. I'm just saying.
John, could you go over the change out of the department head? So like, you're not gonna be department head anymore because the Port Authority is gonna be in command of all of the various infrastructures?
Right, the harbor master is still the harbor master. The job is not going to change. I don't see compensation changing. It's just, the harbor master's not gonna report directly to me anymore. The harbor master will report as one of the divisions underneath the port director. So exactly, the airport, seaplane base, Marine Services Center, any way that you come into Sitka and are a part of the working waterfront, will report to that port director.
How would that go with the GPIP and their own little shot calling aspect of?
That's part of this, and I can only speak kind of broadly right now. And I know Gary's here, but I'm not going to call him up here. He's got a lot of experience with it. When the mill closed, essentially GPIP was set up as an oversight structure to get that mill property put into city hands, whether that be lease the spaces, sell the land, and the rest just incorporate into the overall municipal structure, and then the board essentially dissolves and it's done, because now it's just the rest of the city. And over the years, we've gotten closer and closer to that point. And now that a haul out and working waterfront structures are going in, and some already there, we do have the GPIP utility dock too. It's time to have that conversation. Which of that belongs in harbors, and how do the two boards need to interact? Because you know, as it stands now, we have a Ports and Harbor Commission that makes decisions on rates and tariffs, and then you've got GPIP making other decisions on rates and tariffs, and you might have two funds within the same organization competing against each other. So trying to kind of pull that into one umbrella would be helpful. But it's a big job. It's going to be a big job. Which is why Chris brought it up, because I wasn't ready to do it.
Mr. Celine.
Well, like with the management, like they moved the runway, or, you know, the air taxi or the taxi runway 500 feet closer to the bottleneck in the channel. You know, so I've been apprehensive about if not just a couple airplanes, but a bunch start taxiing, you know, closer towards the bottleneck instead of further out towards the, you know, the breakwater. And I'm apprehensive about that until a lot of stuff has been settled out before we have. Anyway, that's where I'm at. Like I'm worried about who's going to come in, and then, you know, the process in changing how the channel operates has yet to, you know, become apparent, because we don't have the traffic of airplanes that's supposedly going to be coming. And so.
Mr. Yestad.
Yeah, I just do want to kind of emphasize this, that I do want to apologize to this body and John and staff and, you know, Stan and Gary. This is not really the way I intended having this roll out. We had our meeting a while ago now, and in the end kind of decided, just, you know, with everything that's going on, I felt very unsure about this budget year. I just didn't want to pursue it, and kind of decided to drop it. And then a conversation that JJ and I had just kind of spurred me along to, like, you know what, this is the right time. And sadly, it was about 2 days before these were due for this budget meeting, so kind of slammed it together pretty quick and got it put before you, and basically kind of intended to have almost an impromptu discussion direction. So yeah, no, this is not the way I honestly really wanted to roll this out. But timing wise, it felt like it was right to at least have the discussion. So that is why I wanted to put this before you this meeting, so we could have this. And sorry for not doing it a little bit better.
Well, and this isn't the end of the process, it sounds like, by any stretch of the imagination. Like, we're going to be busy with this as it starts to roll out. So, I mean, we're going to have plenty of opportunities to weigh in and put our stamp on this as well, so. Okay, any other comments? Kevin, you going to be all right down there?
Yeah, I'll be all right.
All right. Okay, do we have other things we want to chat about, or, because I think you had some questions about that. Do we need to take a break first? Everybody need a break? How many questions? All right, I think we're going to get back going here, folks. All right, so I'm going to read this a little bit here. So, and we can discuss any additional budget-related items the assembly may have, which brings us to JJ.
I have a question. This is probably for John or Melissa. In the project charter and resource proposals that were listed in the last chunk for the last agenda item, the first one in that kind of packet was about designing or looking at, I think it says fire protection infrastructure, so that's like hydrants at GPIP. It says potentially a split between water and GPIP. Do those groups agree to a 50-50 split?
They do, and I actually really pushed back on this one, and I wasn't sure, and I was convinced. I think Amy is here, and she put this one forward as acting Public Works Director, so she can speak to it as well.
Please, I'd like to know a little bit more about this, because I've noticed that the hydrants out there come in 2 different colors. So if this is part of understanding what that means, that would be, just give me a...
Sure. Amy Ainsley, speaking in my capacity as former acting Public Works Director. There is a non-potable water line at GPIP that is a relic of the mill days. And that infrastructure is kind of living in a bit of a no man's land because it's not really a part of our water fund. And it's only used by GPIP and it's not connected to the rest of our water system. But overall, we have some concerns about particularly water pressures for for fire suppression systems as well as for emergency response as well. And so we want to look at all of the water systems in the park to kind of see where we're losing pressure and what options we may have to either improve and repair the non-potable water line, or if we're better suited, putting our money towards improvements of the potable water line and converting some of those existing systems away from that non-potable line and abandoning that line. And so we did have a lot of discussion about should this entirely come out of the water fund, but ultimately because the non-potable water line has, again, never really formally been adopted, nor do people pay necessarily regular rates to use it. We wanted to kind of share that cost between the 2 funds.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. So it does or doesn't have anything to do with the color of the fire hydrants?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Well, if anyone wants to tell me about that, there's blue ones. The blue is the potable?
Oh, so it does.
Okay. Yeah, all right. Good to know. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Curiosity gets to me sometimes, so I should just come talk to Craig. Thank you for that. It cued me into a different kind of thought about process here too, because I refer to the capital improvement plan often, and I didn't see this one on that list. So can you get a bit of an explanation so I can just learn about how some things kind of pop up in the immediate funding year that haven't been on that capital improvement plan?
Sure, and well, I think the important thing to kind of note about this resource proposal is that it's a study, because we don't have a specific project yet identified. Some of the concerns about water pressure are somewhat more recent. We also just have more users in the park and more development happening in the park that's going to have more demand on those systems. And so as that, these problems have kind of started to arise, development of the park is starting to really accelerate. It's bringing these issues to light, and we want to make sure that where we put our money for a project is is the best use of the funds, because we could spend a whole lot of money, repairing or replacing the non-potable water line, when instead we could have made improvements to our existing potable systems that, has a greater benefit overall, or maybe that's not worth it, but not wanting to kind of jump ahead in terms of defining a project for it.
Great, thank you. Planning is always a lovely thing. That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions about budget or items in this list or anything else?
I'd just say thank you to all the work the staff did. It was a great job as always.
Fantastic, yes. Easy to follow, and I'll learn a lot every time. Okay, hearing anything else, we are now at persons to be heard for public participation on any item on or off the agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes per individual. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, we are at adjournment. Motion
Second.
to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. 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 We are adjourned. Thank you. Good question, JJ. Thank you.